Reviews like this are made possible by your generous support on Patreon. If you want access to fully produced exclusive videos that aren't available here, head to patreon.com/writingongames and pledge only what you're comfortable with. Thanks for your support, and now on with the show. I'll start this off by saying that I don't like tearing into someone else's hard work. It's not how I generally operate on this channel, and it doesn't bring me any joy to do so. And if you stick around, you'll see that what I'm about to go into at the start here isn't necessarily the entire picture. I have to say though, it took me hours to not hate my time with Forspoken. And I'm not talking casual disinterest here. I'm talking about Square Enix's latest thing being so confusingly, compellingly awful, up front at least, that indeed I couldn't put the controller down. For one, it simply took me that long to figure out what this game was actually going for. The languid pacing of its opening chapters giving away very little as to what type of experience Forspoken is. As much as my limited exposure to the title beforehand seemed to suggest a game focused on movement, I guess, what unfurled in those opening hours instead felt closer to the slowest game of Serious Sam you've ever played, frequently interrupted by some weird alternate version of Life is Strange Before the Storm meets David Cage, and the resulting narrative for several hours is every bit as grating as that concept sounds. The incessant banter you're treated to between protagonist and down-on-her-luck New York resident Frey, and the aptly named Cuff guiding her through this fantastical world she's accidentally stumbled into, is what I can only describe as, and I don't use this term lightly, repellent. A collision of the two worst Redditors you can think of, seemingly written with all the sincerity of a 2000s webcomic. The phrase, "well, that was a thing that happened," given form. Now look, I'm aware that my tolerance for snark might differ from others, given my personal distaste towards the back and forths found in Guardians of the Galaxy, for example. But if that thought crossed your mind for even a second that, hey, he didn't like a similar thing in this game that I liked, so maybe I'll actually enjoy it here. Trust me, the levels of smarm here make the Guardians, by comparison, seem like the most earnest group of happy time fun friends imaginable. Every interaction, or hell, every non-interaction, generates some quip from Frey about how, this healing potion tastes like fried crapola, or, is that a mother effing dragon, or, where can I get a knitch in this goddamn dump? With your trusty Cuff responding, I don't even know what a knitch is. Every single joke in those opening chapters, jokes that repeat constantly by the way, amounting to anachronistic colloquialism? What could that possibly mean? If you're not into that kind of thing, it is truly relentless. The thing is, the performance of the central characters isn't awful by any means. I actually found the actors did remarkably well with what they were given. It's just that early on, the writers seem to have precisely zero idea what to do with this protagonist. With the misery of her living situation, in our world I guess, combined with her appreciation of the works of Lewis Carroll, it feels like the writers are setting the scene for a main character whose wandering thoughts paint her as the hero of her own adventure movie in her head, looking towards fantasy for any kind of escape from the hardships of her normal life. And it's a pretty desperate loneliness on display here, with Frey going from sarcastically regaling her cat with grandiose visions of faraway lands, of being needed by everyone, to breaking down in a pretty raw way in front of said cat. It's just that when she's finally granted that escape from the drudgery, the day-to-day struggle she's so eager to leave behind, there's none of the excitement of witnessing this whole new world with all its possibilities unraveling before her. But hey, this world is also terrifying in its own way, which is why it's surprising that there's also very little shock or fear of what she's gotten herself into. The writers vacillating so wildly between portraying Frey as a fish out of water versus the cocky but competent all-knowing wunderkind that the result lands awkwardly in the middle. Two characters characters constantly butting heads with one another, whose sole personality trait, for hours, consists of smug indifference, irritation at the wonders in front of our hero. She's totally over it, man. Turns out that sentiment is totally infectious, sending a cavalcade of thoughts spiraling through my head while I played, of why is this happening now? Why did she do that? Why didn't she just use her powers there? Wow, someone clearly thought that line was more of a zinger than it actually ended up. And light spoiler for the first 20 minutes, I guess. Skip to this timecode if you want to avoid it for some reason. But why can't Frey just pick up the big bag of money in the middle of a fire, then go slowly look for her cat? Why can't she do both? You gave me the option to pick it up right there. Just pick up the big bag of money, you dafty. This could have all been avoided. There's no reason for this to exist. Smug irritation and indifference. A far cry from the wonder the devs probably envisioned players experiencing when they were designing this world. What's more, you find a similar lack of coherent identity in the gameplay, with the staggering volume of mechanical and systemic stuff thrown at you, initially coming across like a kid who's just mixed all the paint colours together, where far from a vibrant canvas upon which everything comes together and works in concert, in reality you're left with little but a goopy grey mush. At its core is a set of movement and shooting mechanics, with some melee thrown in there for good measure, that seek to incentivise speed, fluidity and creativity as you launch yourself along its frankly gargantuan open world. Seriously, even with the speed you're afforded, it would take you a substantial amount of time to see all of it, using the power of the aforementioned snarky cuff. But even before we get to the issues with those mechanics themselves, in terms of how fidgety Frey can be to actually control, how trying to enter a doorway will send her flying off into the sky upon the slightest hint of contact with an errant pebble, all hampered further by a, shall we say, uncooperative camera. For a game so focused on flowing traversal, you sure do spend a long time doing anything but that, being railroaded through what feel like endless walk and talks, what you could loosely call stealth sections, and side quests where you slowly chase cats and feed sheep while running aimlessly around the hub city of Sepal. And when you do get loosed upon the outside world, it isn't as simple as just running and shooting. You've got to learn about managing attack spells in combat, support spells in combat, the wide variety of resources to collect and manage, crafting materials, collecting and upgrading cloaks and necklaces in order to boost the effectiveness of your powers, the various incarnations of the Break, the ominous force corrupting the people and wildlife of Athia, and learning how it affects your combat and traversal, upgrading your magic via a total style over function readability nightmare of an interface, upgrading your magic again via poorly explained gameplay tasks, and the nail polish system, which, while potentially a genuinely novel idea with which to convey some of the world's unique character, and this is a world mind with reams upon reams of lore, a lot of time was spent on that side of things, immediately becomes an afterthought when it comes to gameplay. Because that's the thing here, none of it matters. It's just tutorial after tutorial, feature after feature heaped upon you that all amounts to pure fluff. With so much stuff to keep an eye on at any given time during combat especially, it can be hard to know if you're actually playing Forspoken right, in the way it's intended. But I can safely say, in the 14 hours or so it took me to beat the game, I barely needed a fraction of what Forspoken gave me in order to get by. The effects of painting your nails, the gear upgrades, were almost completely unnoticeable. I legitimately never had to craft a single thing other than increased pouch capacity. I can't fathom the function of most of these resources, where they would even fit in amongst this systemic melange. All you really need to do is run and occasionally shoot. Run past the enemies in the wild because they really don't provide enough XP or items to make farming them worthwhile, and occasionally shoot the ones you can't get past. Run and shoot, run and shoot, run and shoot. I haven't had to stop for a while now. I haven't heard Frey or Cuff comment on how the other is an idiot or how bored Frey is of these otherworldly sights. This part of the game it's taken forever to get to maybe isn't so bad. Like I say, it took me a long time to not hate Forspoken. In other words, despite everything I've talked about up to this point, all those very real problems, I don't hate Forspoken, at least not anymore. To be clear, don't take this as me suddenly turning around to give a glowing recommendation. When this game is bad, and it is for a long time, it's really bad. But that realization of how vanishingly little of the stuff thrown at you actually matters is, in its own way, liberating. Once the game truly opens up, gets out of its own way, removes the shackles, you can sink into something resembling a rhythm from time to time. Don't get me wrong, it's an awkward, stilted rhythm to be sure, dictated as it is, in combat anyway, by Frey's insistence on showing off her acrobatic skills. In the same way, Geralt might balletically swing his sword in The Witcher, and it's hindered by the aforementioned wild camera, sometimes making it near impossible to tell what's actually going on amongst the sparks, combined with one of the least dependable lock-ons a game has ever presented me with. But again, it doesn't really matter. On the default normal difficulty, and outside of the mechanical quirks, the game is kind of a breeze. As Frey's powers develop with the plot, the moveset available to you increases, giving you more fireworks with which to dazzlingly, mindlessly spam the hordes of enemies you're zipping around. And look, I wouldn't normally do this, but Forspoken isn't the kind of game where enduring mechanical self-flagellation is going to reap some kind of FromSoft-esque spiritual contentment. You know, the combat itself isn't anywhere near robust enough for that kind of focused self-improvement. That is to say, far from just being an accessibility concern, the remarkably granular suite of balancing options Forspoken has to offer really is your friend here. If you're picking this game up, don't be afraid to go in and fine-tune your experience to better fit your playstyle. Auto-collecting items so you're not having to grind to a halt and hammer on triangle to pick up some largely pointless plants. Auto-switching between support spells during cooldown so it's one less bad menu to interact with, allowing you to focus on attacking and dodging. This isn't a case of picking the easy mode or trivializing things, it's all rather trivial to begin with. These options just let me remove some of the frustrations, made the game flow more effectively so I could get back to rocketing across the impressive vistas, picking up the Crackdown-esque mana orbs used to upgrade spells. And in those moments, the game can be downright fun. But most importantly, these options allow you to limit the back and forths between Frey and Cuff. It's like they know. And suddenly, quiet. Sweet, merciful quiet with which I can engage, reflect on what it is I'm doing, what Frey's doing. And with her dialogue not being so incessant, it meant I was more willing to focus on the substance of what she's actually saying, culminating at a point where she casually delivers a line during exploration, which I won't spoil outside of saying it's about pancakes, where I don't know if it's just a case of feeling so starved of relatable, likeable dialogue for that long, any genuine attempt to have players connect with this character, but this one exchange hit me like a ton of bricks, so free as it was of any failed sarcasm or self-satisfied edginess aimed at Frey's current predicament or the people surrounding her. And it's there you realise, clearer than at any point in the preceding hours and chapters, Frey's characterization might be awful for the vast majority of the time, but there is a character there, one with an arc that, with a bit more care, with a bit more subtlety, could resonate with people far more than I expect she's going to. Let's just say there are legitimate reasons why Frey has built up such a tough, albeit insufferable shell, and while I can't tell if this is deliberate or not on the part of the writers, given how inconsistently this arc is still treated, especially in its later chapters, Forspoken really plays the long game in gradually breaking down that shell, shard by excruciating shard, to the point that after a while, dare I say, I felt for her situation. The sheer amount of time it takes to get to that point where she's not quite as irritated, as smug, or as indifferent as she is for so much of Forspoken's runtime, rendering a few of the game's big plot revelations, predictable as they might be, as surprisingly impactful, given how pointed they are, how deeply they dig at Frey's obvious issues with trust and abandonment, and playing on her latent feelings of guilt and shame. I'd never go as far as to call her likeable by any means, but she really goes through it, man. She gets hit from every angle with this stuff. Look, at the end of the day, if I had to give Forspoken a score, it would probably be a 3 out of 5. But that is one of the most loaded 3 out of 5s you can possibly imagine. Not the average or the mediocre or the middle of the road 3 out of 5. Forspoken is anything but those adjectives, but rather a game that is as surprisingly really neat as it is captivatingly terrible. And funnily enough, the game that comes to mind in that regard is Final Fantasy XV, another Square Enix joint, and one that functions remarkably similarly to this title. It has got a whole host of extraneous RPG features I categorically couldn't care less about. It's got floaty, trivial combat that I also described as Witcher-like. It has a gargantuan open world, and importantly, it has a story with insane structural issues and characters spouting awkward, stilted dialogue that should have me wincing. And yet, I have a lot of really fond memories of my time with Final Fantasy XV. I genuinely think about that game all the time. I warmed to the characters, the bond they shared, despite their odd presentation and daft plot motivations. I guess what I'm saying is that games don't need to be perfect to have an impact on people, far from it. Sometimes those odd and janky and messy games, even if their constituent parts might be considered bad by conventional metrics, can nonetheless be the ones that truly burrow their way into your brain. Now, I'm not saying that as a means of recommending Forspoken to you. I don't think this is going to have nearly the same impact on me as Final Fantasy XV did. I mean, like I say, at least that game had a central bond you could gravitate towards that held the whole thing together, which is a far cry from anything that Forspoken has to offer in that regard. But say you're really excited for Forspoken, you've got it pre-ordered for whatever reason, don't pre-order games. But who's to say this couldn't be that exact kind of experience for you? 14 hours and over 2,500 words later, I can't tell whether I like Forspoken or not. It's that much of a mess, and in an industry where so many titles fail to get me feeling much of anything, that Forspoken could leave me so stumped, both as to its wild failings, as well as the few surprising successes that managed to peek through the debris. Well, there's a part of me that can appreciate that fact at the very least. Thank you so much for watching. As always, these videos are made possible by the support of my wonderful patrons, whose names you're seeing on screen now. They've also been getting access to exclusive videos I've been producing, fully produced, scripted videos that feel like a better fit on a smaller platform like Patreon. And thank you so much to the new patrons who signed up after the Game of the Year video. All of you are helping ensure that the channel can continue through 2023 and beyond. If you want to help the channel continue and see more content, as well as entirely ad-free uploads, just head to patreon.com/writingongames and pledge only what you feel comfortable with. I am forever thankful for your support in whatever form it takes. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Artyom Vitsyuk, Charles J. Liu, Alistair Dunn, Vitautis Catharsis, Matthew Bowman, Ben Pace, David Karstens, Young Condor, Mike G, Tom Webster, Max Cohen, Danis Sikauskis, Christopher Faherty, Nicholas Villeneuve, Ruth Knapman, Matthew Grover, Yogesh Deshpande, Leah Chinello, Captain Knusprig, Bryce Snyder, Lucas, David Björk, Winter, Timothy Jones, Urban Cheese, Tommy Carver Chaplin, Dr. Motorcycle, Rickety Cricket, CPJ MLT Limited, Lynn Browning, Vila Nurmi, Cameron Sneaseros, Dallas Keane, Charlie Kimball, Jordan Midler, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.